Hi, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Doyle. And there's some things I've got to say tonight. I think I want to talk about community and civic organizations, not specifically, not about the named ones and the organized ones, but just in a general sense. And of course, we can use some of the specifics maybe to support some points or to raise some questions and points. But sort of talk about what they're all about. Why do people feel the need to be a part of or participate in? And I think I want to reach back and connect some of my thoughts about that back to a previous point of discussion that we've had about freedom and kind of what it's all about and what it means and what's in rights and all those kinds of things. And it's really easy to think in terms of a very specific civic organization per se, and talk about what their stated goals and objectives and what their mission is. I mean, they're all about helping a particular group that's in need, or do XYZ for the community, or and some of them are pretty unabashed about just being a social organization, just to get like-minded people together to talk, to enjoy one another's company, and to and just enjoy themselves from time to time. And then sometimes they'll do some things that help others around, just to kind of give them a little bit more of a purpose than just social. But I think what I think it speaks to as much as anything is the desire and the natural tendency that people have to want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Right. And I think in some respects, and I don't want to pull this into the conversation too deeply, but I think that's why we sort of see, governments form. When I say governments, I'm talking about, states, because they're coming together for some purpose, some reason. They may not even understand why in some cases. But thinking more like on the individual and the local level and perspective, the people want to feel connected, right? I mean, everyone has their own degree of desire of connectedness. Some people are more loners than others. They prefer a lot of time alone, but even then, they want to have some degree of connectedness, even if it's just family or close friends or something like that, or people that they connect with in some special way. All the way up to those that their whole existence sometimes appears to be just trying to find a group to go do something with or to be with, and they're not really necessarily happy entertaining themselves, and everything in between. But when you stop and think about sort of what I would call the average human, for a lack of a better term, typical, maybe, I don't know if what the right word would be, but they want to be a part of something, and so they reach outside of themselves sometimes. And if they don't reach out, maybe they start something. I happen to have had the privilege at one point in time, a number of years ago, to kind of help form a specific chapter of a chapter of a specific civic organization. And the mission was to help the children in the community. And one of the things that we did, one of our projects was, and it's kind of ironic that I'm about to say this, but we got to play sit in for Santa Claus during one Christmas, and I actually got to sit in and be Santa Claus.
This was pre-beard, right?
Pre-beard and even pre-size, quite frankly. When now I can replace Santa Claus both with the beard and with the size.
And the
I was
jolliness.
and the jolliness. Yeah, let's say I was a skinny Santa Claus, to say the least, and brunette Santa Claus. But in any event, and that was a kind of a neat thing, right? I met some folks that I hadn't known before, and we got to do something that made you feel good that you were doing something besides meeting every Tuesday morning for breakfast and coffee, right before work. That's what we did. Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock, we met in one of the local restaurants for breakfast and coffee, and that was nice, right? But after a period of time, it just became, it wasn't much beyond that, and I think that organization, it still continues today, but it was just something that was, for a period of time for me at that particular point in time, and there were other groups that I've participated in. Um, but I think a lot of times it's people are searching for something, right? And I think that's what is a big part of what it is, and there are probably many other reasons behind the motivation. Um, but what I really want to do, and you can take this a different direction if you'd like, is talk about what's the real human purpose. What's the community purpose and benefit of these kinds of groups, and quite frankly, what I think is um, something that I believe to be the case, and I think this is certainly supported by. The churches, the Christian churches that I'm familiar with, and I'm not saying exclusively this, but I can speak from a firsthand experience, is that becomes the method or a method for helping those in need around, right? I'm a strong, staunch believer that it's not the government's responsibility to help those in need, although in the present day in the United States and in other countries as well, there are a lot of governmental programs that are on the backs of taxpayers to provide for those that are in need, that have legitimate needs, right? I'm not talking about illegitimate needs, but legitimate needs. But I think organizations are, I would think, would be the preferred mechanism and avenue for delivery of the meeting those needs, right? And we see it. I mean, I see it even now, even despite the fact that the United States has such vast tax dollars that have been taken from the citizens to put into these what they call entitlement programs, which I think is a horrendous way to look at them. Um, uh, uh, and by the way, for another topic, Social Security is not an entitlement. It's an insurance program that's paid into by all the workers over the years. Different topic for
It's not real
later
insurance either.
conversation.
I mean,
This
if
is
we want
true.
to go all
This
the
is
way.
That's right. But it's certainly absolutely not an entitlement program.
Sure.
And I don't think that the social programs designed to help people in need should be considered entitlement programs, right? They should be, well, first of all, they shouldn't be coming from the government, but if as they are, they should be looked at as a helping hand,
Hmm.
right? And then they're a helping hand, not a permanent hand, but a helping hand. And a helping hand stops helping when that need has been addressed and resolved. But I do think these civic organizations and community organizations, whatever they might be, I mean, I think in terms of the food banks being one of these community organizations, right?
Sure.
They're nonprofit. I think they do a fantastic work uh, for the community, and they're right at the source of the problem and of the need. Where the needs are, they can meet it. And I think that's one of the fantastic benefits and values and objectives of these kinds of community organizations.
Well, taking
Additionally,
just one thing I want to say about food bank, taking that example specifically, not only is it right there where the need is and it needs being met, the need is being explicitly directly met in terms of what the need actually is versus substitute provision for a certain need that can be used for other things as well that don't there's no guarantee that it's going to go to what's what the need actually is. And of course, you could say, well, the food bank doesn't necessarily guarantee that need either, because it could be squandered, thrown out, whatever, given away to other people. Sure, but at least that's about as close as you're going to get to providing for that need.
there are fewer steps that the provision of the need goes through to get to the where the need actually exists.
Right.
Which I think that was sort of the path I was considering going down. Is that's the case? That is the most efficient and cost-effective way to meet needs is at
Absolutely.
the source of the need, because
And
it'll
in
do two
terms of the
things.
need, I think those are the two big key parts.
Yes, because I think these organizations are more uh, structured and built and intended to be uh, uh, meeting the need, but also providing a way out of the situation and circumstances
Mm,
that cause the need, right? Because with all due respect to these the welfare programs in this United States, the WIC program, the Women's and Infants and Children, I absolutely would be first to say I do not want children to go to bed hungry. I don't. But I think there's such bureaucracy in all of that and such inefficiency that it's only some portion is getting there, but nothing is helping the families get out of the situation where they had that need. And I
sure.
think it's
I want to ratchet
Okay.
back a little bit because we're getting a little too far down the road,
I
I
am.
think, for that
Absolutely, I
topic
did.
versus the
chased
civic
I chased
organization.
the squirrel.
We should have that conversation though, because it's very important. I think. But if you don't mind me stepping in here for a minute,
Feel
I
free.
think that I can tie this back in a more in a elegant way. To the conversation about civic organizations, kind of taking back to the point where you jumped off that, I don't know, freeway proper.
Line of thinking. Yes.
um, Talking about though the churches and providing for the community and all of that, and I think that yes, that is to me one of the biggest reasons why civic organizations need to exist. Not it's not nice to have them. It's not, oh well, if people are so inclined, that's fine. They can do that. If they don't feel like it, that's fine too. I think no, we need them because precisely. I'm an economist at heart, and I've talked a lot about economics, and if I haven't yet on this podcast, I think I have a little bit. I'm sure I will a lot more in great detail in the future. But it's a real bad incentive problem that and this is the last thing I'll say about this before we get way back into civic organizations. It is a really bad incentive problem that the source of meeting the need, put away the argument whether welfare and all those programs meet the need. Let's just assume that they do meet the need, and assume that they meet them just as well as a local civic organization could meet, including obviously churches, etc. Let's just assume that's same. I don't think it is, but let's assume that it's same. It's a
Mhm.
really bad incentive problem that some bureaucracy, or just not say. I don't want bureaucracy to be interpreted as a pejorative. So some organization far removed from this community is the one providing that support to those individuals in this community versus an organization in this community. What you're doing effectively, or what they're doing, and this is human nature, and this is understandable human nature, they're basically buying allegiance. So these people are going to have a higher allegiance to that remote organization than they are going to have to their community, which makes the community weaker, just objectively
Mhm.
makes it weaker. And so what you need is those community ties to be strong, so that in the event that any person has any kind of unforeseen accident or tragedy happen, the community can rally around that person and help them. And then, because there's going to be tragedies that happen that there's not a program for in the government. There's those happen every day and to all manner of people, and the community can be equipped to address most, if not all, of that. The remote government or any remote organization can't be, because they aren't in the community. They don't know those people, and thus it's easier for bad apples to try to demonstrate that they have this need to, and as long as they tick these three boxes, then that remote organization is going to be like, yep, you need this here, and the local organization has a better line of sight to validating that need, right? Because the needs have to be validated, because that's the world we live in.
Mhm.
And even if it doesn't have to be validated, at least the local organization is still keeping all of those resources in the local community, which, even if they're being squandered to a degree, is better than taking resources from somewhere else that could be used for another community somewhere, because that's important
Sure.
too.
Mhm.
Anyway, okay. So back onto civic organizations, and a little bit more toward the even more of the human element, and not kind of like the tragedy emergency. Trying to deal
Right.
with the unfortunate natures of that life can bring. Looking at what I think is an interesting feature and function of civic organizations that just did not register with me as an individual until, I would say, within the past year, which is sad to say, and I'm ashamed to say that, but I readily admit it here, is why people even care about those kinds of organizations. What do they do? What do they mean? What do they matter? Of course, there's the whole helping to provide for the community in emergency situations, but there's things beyond that, right? In this, I mean, you can kind of construe this as an emergency thing too, but protection, right? Of course, we many most, certainly not all, but most communities have some sort of a law enforcement organization around that protects them. But I think both you and I know, Doyle, being well acquainted with more rural type areas, that's not always sufficient for protection, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's better to have a neighbor who knows you, and you know them, and it's you're the two of you are invested in each other's well-being because
Yeah.
helping each other out and make sure that you're just making it,
Right.
and
So like, hey, Jordan, there's this pickup truck pulled up in your driveway and sat there for 30 minutes today. Is it somebody you know? Do you recognize that
right,
vehicle? Yeah.
exactly, and not to be skeptical of everything, but just to be try. That's how people remain safe. People are really concerned about safety these days, understandably so. That's a great low cost, low effort, highly efficient way to maintain more safety than we would have without such kind of bonds. And
Sure.
so civic organizations can facilitate that sort of a thing, right? Um, and not only that, but also give character to a community, give life to a community in a way that if it's just a bunch of people in a bunch of different houses and just some businesses maybe, and it's like, well, okay, what, it's just a bunch of individuals like little atoms, atoms, just bouncing around and not really interacting, inert, and so like inert gases
Yeah.
or whatever. It's like, what kind of life is that? And for me, being someone who came of age at the real dawn of the internet, it's hard for me to understand what life was like before the internet. I remember time before the internet to a small degree, but I don't remember anything about me being certainly not an adult without the internet, and not
So
even really a teenager.
so you don't remember when there were only three channels on the television, and they were all coming across on the air,
Well,
and you had to watch
I,
it on the
I
exact.
do remember some of
I'm just
that, but
no, I'm just being silly here because
right,
this the generation that was how I remember, right? Well, first of all, I remember that the television only came in two colors, black and white.
right.
It was color, but it was black and white, and and then at 11:30 or midnight, depending on what day of the week it was, you got the test pattern, and if anyone doesn't know what the test pattern is, just Google that, and you'll see exactly. And so that was what was broadcast over the television stations till 6:30 the next morning when the news came on. But the point being you're making is it is something that is essential. These civic and community and local based organizations, no matter if they're extremely formal or if they're informal, much like Neighborhood Watch, right?
Hmm.
Which is an
Yeah.
example of that. And to the protection that you're talking about, and and neighborhoods that have homeowners associations, and I know there's a whole debate to be had about that, because some people swear by them, and some people wouldn't live within 100 miles of an HOA, and I think that there's a lot of in between that is where reality exists. You only hear the extremes, pretty much on just about on any issue, right? That's where you hear the loudest voices on the extreme. But I mean, there are a lot of organizations like that don't have a charter per se. They're not quote unquote statutorily registered, but they're nonetheless formed. And I mean, even the book clubs or the whatever it is. I mean, there was well, I started to use a little off-color group that was these ladies I used to work with. One day a week, they would have the Stitch and group
Yeah.
where they would, basically they said it and we didn't. No one else said it about them. They said it.
Stitch and Moan
But it was
group. It's a Stitch and Moan group.
more the more rhyming version of
No, I know, but
that.
get it? That's another pun in the same direction. Stitch and
Oh yeah,
Moan.
yeah, right. And they, I mean, and that was because they got something out of it, right? They worked professionally together, but then they had that social, and it served a purpose that was beyond just them doing needlepoint or things of that sort, whatever it was that they enjoyed. And much like a group of guys that go golfing, the foursome that
Oh
goes
yeah.
golfing every Saturday or Sunday morning, and it's a well, some folks say a round of golf is a what, a 2 mile walk ruined by chasing the ball. It's a good idea to get some exercise. But I mean, there are other residual benefits as well that make it balanced, right? That you
Sure.
don't have to be, the kind of group, and that I think sometimes, we're it's easy to think of the extreme groups, right? There are those kinds of groups and organizations that are in the extreme. They form gangs, as an example, right?
Oh
You know,
yeah.
and that
But that's the
exist
thing.
around in communities.
I'm glad you bring that up because I really truly 100% so deeply believe that the formation of gangs is exactly because we have a lack of functional civil organizations,
Sure.
and the substitutes for a lot of those civil organizations are also completely dysfunctional in those communities.
Hmm.
It's human nature making the thing happen that needs to happen. It's just it's happened in a corrupted way, unfortunately,
Right.
and it's just so sad. It's so sad that those kinds of communities where that kind of activity forms. And I'm no stranger to that, right? I grew up in, or at least close proximity to a town that had gang activity, and certainly now it does. And went to college in a city that has a lot of gang activity, right? It's kind of hard to avoid gang activity in cities because precisely that
Mhm.
reason. Those community organizations don't really, civic organizations don't really exist so strongly in cities as much as they do even in rural areas, or particularly in the past, because that was absolute necessity in rural areas. Um, but I want to make 2 points about this, and one tying back to what we were talking about with kind of the entitlement programs is that um, there's and the other being a causal factor. I think one of the causal factors in the decline in civic organization membership, you know, proliferation, however you want to talk about it. I mean, this is an obvious one, right? And it's the internet generally, but not only that, it's the ability to find and associate with individuals in groups via the internet that are so hyper specific to your interests that it makes it a boring prospect to go and try to meet with a group of just general people and like try to figure out, oh, who do I have anything in common with, right? Let alone all of the anxiety providing aspects of the internet's easier with anonymity and you get used to that, and then it makes it hard to go talk with real humans. There's a whole lot of human psychology and
Oh yeah.
psychophysiology that's all tied up in that are really deep and scary topics to start thinking and talking about because of what we have already done to ourselves as a human race, and where do we go from that, and how do we warn children about that, and especially when everything's pushing to make them be so rebellious against wanting to wait to get like a phone, wait to get the internet, wait to get a tablet, all of that. Anyway, that's a completely different conversation that we absolutely need to have. So that triggers a lot of two things that well, one thing that manifests in two ways is this lack of civic engagement, right? Which is basically what we're talking
Hmm.
about here: lack of civic engagement, and a superlative of ultra civic engagement. And so, what I mean by that is that the local community gets ignored, but like the state or like the country or whatever gets hyper focus, right? More so than even before. And so we have a
Hmm.
really, really, really bad problem. And I'm sure somebody somewhere has talked about this, but I haven't come across them yet. And so I have no mistake or that this is an original idea to me because I guarantee you it's not. I have not read enough, so I don't know. We have one of the biggest crises we face right now. The fundamental aspect of it is that disconnection with our local community and just other human beings. Vis-a-vis the internet. But I think the kind of unspoken, well, to me, I've never come across again. Consequence of that is this undying fealty to organizations and leadership that are outside of your community while simultaneously disdaining the organizations and the leadership within your community. And that is
Sure.
such a profoundly anti-human way of thinking about and feeling about things. I don't think people understand how grave that is and how serious that really is.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a factoid, I'll call it that, that I came across probably 15 years ago now, in a professional capacity. Um, uh, uh, I was working and still do in information technology for a large national retailer. And one of the things that we had to do was to keep track of customer addresses of that particular retailer, right? And what we
Sure.
discovered was, on average, 20% of the people in the United States move every year, right? And so just through extrapolation, that this doesn't hold true, because some people move more than this. But in 5 years, 100% of the population would move. So that's not true. So,
In
but what that
number,
means,
right? Yeah, in number.
correct, right, and the number of people that would move. So there's a number of people that are moving more frequently. And so, to your point, it never occurred to me, but this, I think, is a factor that has contributed to the point you raised, that the anchor for their connection is at a higher level than their community. I grew up in a community, and was a Navy kid. My dad was a career sailor, and so we moved a good bit as I was growing up, and that stopped when I was 12, because he went to Vietnam for 2 years and came back and then retired from the military. But so the first 12 years, 10 years of my life, actually, we moved 3 or 4 times between three different states. Stayed in the U.S. the whole time. But the part was, we were stayed connected to our home base, quote unquote, right? That's where both of my mom's and my dad's family, lived here, and so all of our relatives are here. And I grew up in a community where, I knew everybody, and literally, and well, close to literally, because it was a small community, but still there were a few people, but I felt like I knew the vast majority of the people I encountered, because of the family and the family connection.
Sure.
And that has, over the last X number of years, 40, 50 years, that has changed, in that now that and I'm still living in the same community, or within 10 miles of the same community, in the same general geographic area. But my knowledge of the people has so reduced. Now, granted, there's more people now than there were, but my knowledge is so that really kind of constricts my community connection through the larger community here. But what's stayed the same is that I'm still a U.S. citizen. I still live in the state that I lived in, even though I lived out of it for a period of time. This is the anchor state, and I think that feeds into what you said a while ago. Uh, I think we have a more mobile society today than we did even one generation ago, but most especially 2 or 3 generations ago. There were, 3 generations ago, people grew up, and even if they got married, they lived right next door to where their parents were. I mean,
Sure.
the parents gave them a spot of land, and they built a little house on it and raised their family right next to their parents, right? And that's how it happened a lot, and especially in rural. It didn't happen so much in the cities, but out in the rural area, it certainly happened, that in a very frequent basis. I even remember, when I was growing up, hearing, oh, so and so got married, and his mom and dad gave him a half-acre land next to theirs to build his house on. Right? I mean, and so I
Sure.
even personally witnessed some of that occurring, and that's not happening now, right? I mean, it's not uncommon for, when kids grow up, they get out of high school, they may go, 4 states away, 500 miles away or more, to a college, make connections there, and never return to their home community except for holidays and vacations, right? That kind of thing. And so that whole thing of community gets weaker and weaker, which I think is there's a lot of sad to that. Well, there's a lot of
Well,
good too, and I
I
don't want
think I think
to.
well, I think we're hitting at something here, which is interesting. And I don't want to, again, derail us too much, because I don't think we're going to get to all of the points that I really wanted to talk about on this topic tonight, which is fine. We should totally pick it up again. But I think we've got this weird kind of dynamic going on. I think you're correct. I think your point is germane and salient. Absolutely, that there is the identity. When you say anchor point, it's more like identity. They're identified
Mhm,
more with their state or the country, right?
mhm,
And so then there's less barrier in that sense to move. I think also there's weaker things going on within the community, as we're talking about, with lack of civic engagement, etc. That again reduces that barrier, and then at that point it becomes a downward spiral, right? Because
mhm.
the more moving creates less less buy-in to where you're at, it creates less civic engagement, blah, 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 all the way down. Um, So that's problematic. But I think also simultaneously we have another opposite problem, and so maybe this is kind of one of those weird things where um, we're creating a disintegrity because these two problems are simultaneously happening. So I think that's one. I think that's problematic, and I mean we can have a discussion if we think it's problematic or not. But personally, I think that's problematic. What you've described about fixing that
Hmm.
anchor point in your term higher than the local community. Um,
Agreed.
and I think there's anchor points below the local community too, as well, right? The family, and then the individual is
Hmm.
the lowest anchor point. Well, I guess we can get real philosophical and talk below the individual, but that's definitely another podcast. The other
Hmm.
point, though, is that we have a resistance of a large uh, uh, bit of the country. Again, it's just scope to the United States because I know very little to nothing of other countries in this manner. Um, of people who are strapped for opportunity, like economic opportunity, and are utterly unwilling to pick up and move. Right, I'm thinking about, and I don't mean
Sure.
any disrespect by this at all, but I'm thinking about people like in dead mining towns in West Virginia, all kinds of
Hmm.
different places, right, where that is their home, and because they precisely have the inverse there, where they are anchored so strongly to their local community, they are very unwilling, if not completely unwilling, to consider moving somewhere else for better economic opportunity for them and their family, which again
Sure.
creates its own kind of problems. But I think those two things together are creating this disintegrity of the ability to rely on the local community, because the people who are affixed to the community are people who can't effectively helps build the support structure for that community, and the people who can are chasing the opportunity elsewhere, because
Hmm.
they're in higher demand for their value in places where they can make more money, and it's more cosmopolitan if that's what they enjoy, or it's more just general opportunity if that's what they're looking for. And I think that there is a misplaced value structure in both of those individuals, right? And I don't know where that comes from. That's something I've not thought deeply enough to try to understand where that comes from.
Well, it probably comes from a lot of different ways. It probably it originates with the family,
Yeah.
right? Because when I
Oh yeah, I'm
think in
sure that's right.
terms of, like I mentioned my family earlier, and something I may not have shared with you before, but and you may be aware, but I graduated from the same high school that my mother did,
Hmm.
right? And in fact, there were a few of the same teachers that were early in their teaching career when she was in high school, and they were in the latter years of their teaching
That
career.
happened with me and my mother as well, actually.
And so, but where I grew up, it's a small community outside of one of the major metropolitan areas, but it was the county was rural. There were 3 high schools in the county, and as a teenager, you identified, well, which high school you went to. Oh, did you go to A, or did you go to B, or did you go to C? And and people, they knew that. Oh, those are the guys from over here, or that's the girl from up there, and there were it was a lot of it was good natured. The competition, right?
Oh
Obviously, there's
yeah,
always the sports competition and other kinds of competition,
sure, sure.
but then it was more social competition too, right? Because
Hmm.
some of the people that I grew up with from the other schools, I got to know them because it was a small community, right? And so
Sure.
as we especially playing sports and things of that sort, you interacted with them on many different levels during depending upon what season the sport was, and I think that created a sense of community within the community, if you will. Because frankly, right now, some of the people that I knew from the other school that I built relationship with, I still have good relationships with them. Right, one of them's a bank. Actually, two of them are bank presidents nearby. I've never had to go call on them for their services, but I mean, those are the kinds of community things that you move into a new community, you don't have that. You
Right.
don't know, the loan officer or the bank president or who those
Oh
kinds of
well,
things. And
I'm acutely aware of that. But as you know, Doyle, I've moved not only into another community, but not only to another state, but the other side of the country, effectively from where I was generated, let's say. um, and so
Certainly social on the other side of the country.
right, and so it's interesting, and maybe man, this is a surprisingly relevant topic, or relevant to this topic. I I didn't feel a shock being here other than a little bit at first because it was just so different. Like it was so different, not because of the people or anything. It was just different because it's not something I'd done before.
Yeah, you weren't familiar with a lot of stuff either. Yeah,
What was that?
I mean the you weren't familiar with the area, the neighborhood, and things like that
Right,
as
right.
much.
And now it's so funny. This is so funny because this is just so. I should have expected this. I don't know why I didn't. And now I know mostly more about this area than my wife does. My wife's from this area, and so like I could, you know, she can give like a general direction where like another town is, or like some a certain road and where it's going. But I'm getting to the point where you know I can. Show shortcuts that would be faster than the path that she had imagined. So that's one of those
We
weird
used to
things.
do it, like we used to do in the country. Yeah, you go down to
Yes,
the double oak tree and then take a left, and
right,
then in
right.
the third house on the right.
But my
Yeah.
point being, it's like I know nobody here except for my wife's family. Basically, I'm trying to think if there's any. I know a few individuals, very shallowly, I'll say,
Mhm.
because I've played a card game that you play at a store, Magic the Gathering. So I've played Magic. I actually haven't played it in a while, probably a couple years at this point. But like there were two times where I played it for a very long time, and it was going like really pretty religiously to the store weekly to play. And during both those periods, you know, I met a lot of the same guys because they constantly. And one of them actually owns a card store closer to us now. So one of these days I'm going to go back and say hey to him. But that's it. It's really shallow. We play a game together, and we never did anything outside of playing a game at the shop. And so that's literally all of my connections around here. And so like it didn't really phase me. But now it's really starting to bother me. Not because like I feel at home or like I'm not at home. I feel very comfortable here. I really like the town that I live in. I really like. It's kind of hard for me to overstate that. But I don't feel connected to it at all. And it's just day by day it becomes more and more larger in my awareness that I don't even know what these people around here are like, right? And then, but I think about where I'm from. I'm like, well, I know how most of those people are. I don't really like a lot of it. Some of it, I think, you know, I definitely gel with, but a lot I don't just really understand. But that it feels more comfortable to not understand that, but still know what that is with those people, than to not know anything about these other people. So it's like, and so it's like I keep coming to an idea of like how do I engage, and it's like I that's why I said I'm almost ashamed to say this, is that like I had no idea these sort of organizations were so important, why they were, and it's like now I understand, but it's like, well, which one is even anything now? Because like there's all
Right.
kinds of them around here. What's even worthwhile to try to get into? You know, is it worth your
You
time?
know,
And it's like,
well, but you kind of spoke about the people that you played, you know, Magic with, Magic the Gathering, the card game, which by the way, I was afraid you might say that the store was actually a casino and the card game was poker, but I didn't know if
no,
you were going down. I'm just kidding.
not to say
Um,
that I haven't,
but
but
but didn't your grandfather teach you to play poker? I'm just kidding. Uh,
that's probably true.
as a for fun, I think is the story I heard. But the point I was getting at is that that's sort of what you explained, and that group is that serves one of the purposes of these community groups and organizations. It's the social aspect of it, right?
Yeah,
Because that's so important. I mean, I think that's actually fundamental. That's really, if
right.
that wasn't there, then they would cease to exist,
Well, that's
right? I think
that's the psychophysiological part of it too. And I
right.
can't, this is the second time I've said those two words together, and I mean to say those two words together because a lot of people say, "Oh, it's just psychological." It's not just psychological, because if it were just psychological, then you could get it on the internet, right?
Right. Sure.
Totally,
Sure.
and you can't. It's something about being there with that person, laying eyes directly on that person, right? The light that bounces off of their skin going into your eyes. There's something different about that.
Well, you know that you've heard me use this phrase a long, long time ago. I suspect the VHF,
Oh yeah,
the
virtual
the
high
virtual
five.
high five.
Yeah,
Right. It isn't the same as the real one, right? And
right.
it's because that human touch has
It's
value.
I taught that to my
Yeah.
mother-in-law when we went over there for the first time, like during this pandemic that's going on. When we were leaving, I said VHF, and of course they looked quizzical as I figured that they would, my in-laws, and I said, "Oh, virtual high five," and she got it, and they thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, but I mean, but it is kind of funny, but they also people also understand that it's not the same thing, right? And
Right.
that's your point. That's your point that you can get many things in alternate ways, but they're still come up a little bit short in some aspects, right?
Yeah.
And then I think you the psychosocial or the psychophysical social, or I mean, there's really a rich dynamic here. What you're
Absolutely.
describing, and
Yes.
and I think your admission, discovery, revelation, epiphany, or what it is about, your new neighborhood, that you realize that you're not as connected as you were with the neighborhood that you grew up. I mean, when you were there. I mean, I'm not saying you're still connected to it. I don't mean that, but I
Right.
mean
Right.
because of the lack of some of the actual social and physical interaction, and and I think what people do that when they realize that they find alternate ways to meet that need, either in
Yeah.
small groups, in one or two friends, and that uh, sometimes can create great attachments, but sometimes can probably create unhealthy attachments, I would imagine.
Certainly.
This
Certainly.
person, I can't, someone could get to the point where I can't survive without that person's company, and I'm not talking about a mate. I'm talking about, a friend, that is,
Right.
friends are partial, mates are still partial, but mainly permanent, expected to be permanent, or anticipated to be permanent, and full person, kind of
That's
cycle and social interactions.
You just hit on like two or three different podcast topics right there, really important ones, I think.
I agree. So maybe is this a good spot to sort of start to wrap up and
Yeah, we
and say
probably
we've
should.
we've we've thrown out lots of lines and roadmaps to go pursue later. And I think what we're discovering, at least I am, is um, I've thought about this a couple of times. The Cheshire Cat, and he the one, and I think I've even said this before in
Oh
Alice
yeah.
in Wonderland. And when Alice walks up and says, where should I go? Which road should I take? And he goes, where are you trying to get to? And she goes, I don't know. And then he says, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes I feel like our conversations are start that way because we don't really have a destination in mind. We don't have a
Sure.
a point we're trying to prove per se. And I think it's that all of these paths that we allude to and talk to, we've talked so much in the past and over the years, that I think we have points of view. There are lots of things that are burning inside of us that we want to get out, for number one, just to get them out from us because we
Yeah.
think it's something to get out, but also there might be some value that we can bring to the world and somehow, right? I mean, I can remember hearing people discuss their perspective and their points of view. Not that it necessarily convinced me to change mine, but it shed light differently for me than what I knew before, what I thought before.
Absolutely.
And
You don't understand the bounds of your own thinking. That's the problem. That's the real problem for people who don't understand why it's so important to have open, honest dialogue, and let those conversations and those discussions and those debates go on topics that people think are taboo and shouldn't be talked about. No, we got to talk about it all. We got to talk through it all, because no one understands what bounds they're putting on their own thoughts, and how unhealthy that could be, not just for them, but for the others around them as well.
sure. And I think we hit some areas that will tonight, some topics that will have paths that will put you and me in some territory where people will have some concerns about what we might have to say. But
Sure.
I mean, I think there are things that need to be said constructively, right? And I
Absolutely.
have no goal, no desire, no intent to be critical for destructive purposes. If I do or say anything critical in our conversations, it's either meant out of ignorance, and hopefully that won't be the norm, that I say critical things out of ignorance, or it's to understand it and or to influence how to make it different or better, right?
Well,
And I think that's
uh,
one of
I think for the most part, I would agree with that for me. I do want to take one exception, and I think it's important because some things are of the nature to be wholly criticized and discarded and replaced, and some things can't be fixed. And I don't think that's a default approach, right? I think it's really bad to take that as a default approach. I think that's a last resort approach. Always, that's a
yes.
last resort approach, but sometimes that's necessary.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that, and I think there's another topic there for us to tie back to, our previous conversations about rights,
Sure.
fundamental rights, and fundamental freedoms that I think that can demonstrate strong support for one way of looking at what you just got through saying. That there are some absolutes that there are no ways to make it acceptable it except for expungement, or whatever the appropriate
And
terminal phrase would be.
and the al- almost more grave, but even less grave in some ways, aspect of all of this too is that how much should we even expect to be able to affect in this life, right? Because one human's lifespan is um, sadly finite, right? I mean, and when I say sadly, I mean it doesn't matter if you live 150 years. It doesn't matter if you're Methuselah. It's still sadly finite from my perspective.
Oh,
Um,
for sure. When
so
when 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 you try to encompass what eternity is and think
right.
about the spectrum of life, in the duration of even a long life, you're absolutely correct in that regard. So, all right. As always, lots of fun.
Yes, sir.
This one was good in that I think we launched a number of seedling topics that we'll need to find a way to get out and discuss even more coming forward,
Sounds good.
if we can recall. It is
Right.
a challenge.
We'll have to write them down.
Yeah, there's a saying that says, what is it? There's a phrase, and I can't remember who to attribute it to, about there's always something to be said for every situation. The challenge is to remember what it is when the situation arises,
Right.
and it's I guess akin to the proverb, the verse out of Proverbs that says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pitchers of silver," and that's sort of the case. We want to be able to have some appropriate words. I won't go and say they need to be words of gold, but they need to be something that have value. So I
Well,
look
I
forward to it.
think, and I think that it's a refining process too, right? You're not going to open your mouth and speak the word, right? You're going to open your mouth and you're going to speak imperfectly, but you speak as close to the truth as you possibly can. And then, especially, this is another reason why human interaction, human discussion is important, is because that you sharpen each other and you refine each other and you get closer and closer and closer to the truth. The more that you have that open, honest dialogue, discussion, debate. Um, and
I see what you did. You went and tied back to another topic we had talked about, the word,
sure, absolutely.
and
Well, that's the thing,
people
is
in the word.
if we could speak the perfect truth, we wouldn't have to speak. But because we can't, we must speak.
That was deep. That was deep. Great point to end tonight on. So, again, it was a pleasure. It was fun,
Absolutely,
and
Dylan.
it was really fun.
All
All right,
right.
man.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
All right. See
Good
you next
night.
time. Bye.